Hey guys, this is Bill Combs
and Jeff Newton,
and this is the Flashbang Creative Podcast. Welcome back, everybody. We're going to approach this from a little bit of a different angle today. We've kind of been more in lecture mode and kind of in a bigger picture frame set from the get-go of this podcast, and now we want to bring it down a little bit closer and focus on your daily tasks and how to become more efficient and effective with the daily tasks of running a business.
Yeah, you know, as I think back to an analogy, right? It's either analogies or stories is how I can really process through a lot of this stuff. And throughout a couple of different past careers, one particular mentor really stands out, and he always preached the importance of the blocking and tackling, right? If you looked at the difference between a win and a loss in a football game, for example, it wasn't necessarily sometimes that it was that one breakout play where they happened to score the touchdown or anything else. It was the consistency of showing up the entire team, not missing tackles, playing clean, playing appropriately, and just fundamentals. And so, you know, to break down a lot of what we had been talking about in a number of the different podcasts earlier, I think what we wanted to do is really just kind of focus in on what would blocking and tackling look like for you in your business. And as you may have heard in the last episode, if you caught that, based on the response we've been getting and the professionals and the people that have been reaching out to us, we really made a conscious decision to change the scope of where we were targeting the podcast audience beyond just simply firearms instruction and firearms instructors, and really to try to cater to our entire community, which is the firearms community. So firearms professionals at large. So we're talking FFLs, gun shops, ranges, complexes, manufacturers, instructors, all at once. So you may notice our tone changes a little bit, or the examples we provide might not be exclusive to one of those niches. But you know, don't tune out and don't stop listening, because we're going to try to deliver it in a way that really still keeps it completely applicable if you truly get honest with yourself and think about, how can I make that apply to my situation?
So we've been doing a lot of consulting lately, and as Flashbang Creative evolves, and one of the big topics that always comes up is, you know, what are your daily tasks like? What's a common day at the office? And the office could be at your brick and mortar storefront, or could be in your basement or in your garage or shop. It doesn't really matter. But you know, occasionally there's a little bit of a deer in the headlights look when we ask, what are your operations like? And it's not to pick on anybody or anything like that. It's just something that maybe they don't think about, you know, and it's really easy to get sort of lost in the sauce, or, you know, it's kind of, you're juggling contacts. So, for example, when somebody calls, say you have two people call and ask, you know, or inquire about a particular firearm, or are you offering this course, when, where, how much? And then now let's take that and move it over. Let's say you get 3 emails from individuals who are asking similar questions. How do you juggle those? What are you doing to juggle between the digital inquiries and, you know, over the phone? How are you keeping track of it all? How are you maintaining or managing the juggle?
Yeah, and one way I think about that, and one way that we really put systems in place in our businesses, Bill and I, is a couple of different things, and so I'll talk through that. One would be is a statement that my dad always challenged me with, and growing up it always pissed me off, but I now understand and respect the wisdom that were in the words. And he would always challenge me whenever there'd be a situation or whatever. He'd ask me, are you acting or are you reacting? And as much as my blood would boil over when he'd ask me the question, because I would know that I'd generally be in the wrong, what that did without me knowing was really reshape my thought patterns to ensure that in other situations, when I encountered them the next time, I'd be able to witness, observe, and consciously know how I'm going to choose to act and what I wanted that outcome to be. So to make that less vague, let's just use that example of the email comes in, right? So you get 3 or 4 emails throughout the day, or throughout the minute. You ought to be able to already know what your prescription is for the response on that, right? So you should be thinking through service and recognizing that you're in a service business first, period. And then you just happen to be offering, a product, a good, or a service behind it. But either way, you really need to understand relationships and service to begin with, and script out, not robotically. And when I say that, I mean, from a nomenclature or a words and a practicality. Don't speak like robot, but what are those interactions going to look like? Are you going to reference people by their first name? Are you going to ask questions about what it is they inquired about to further qualify whether or not your first gut reaction of a response or a recommendation is going to be the right one? Or do you want to start to foster that relationship and build on it? And the 2 scenarios could be react, right? I'd react to that email that just landed in my inbox. Hey, do you have any Glock 43s available? Or, are there still slots available for that upcoming course? Immediately, the human nature side of me would be jump on that, pounce on it, yes, no, boom, get a response, and done. But if you did that, you didn't allow yourself any time or any, I don't know what the right word is for it. You didn't inject any relationship into that interaction to break it from just being a transaction, right? So there's no reason for that person to, continue a conversation with you.
So Glock 42, cool. What, you're interested in the Glock 42? Yeah, I've got a couple. What do you plan on using it for? Ask some probing questions, and even if you don't care, and you just want the sale, however you run your business, but engage with them, and you're going to gain a lot more traction. Or maybe you're going to swerve them into something more appropriate. You're going to actually be providing them that service by using your knowledge and directing them into the product that they really do need, as opposed to the one that their buddy got.
Yeah, so to wrap up the thought around acting, not reacting, I guess my entire point there is, if you going back to the sports analogy, right? So, where are you going to be? How are you going to be that? Are you going to close the gap? Which player is picking up which play? Those kinds of things. The whole purpose behind that statement and that thought process is everything that happens in your business. If you think about it from the day-to-day standpoint, right? Phone call rings, customer comes in, emails are coming in. Almost everything could have the best case scenario scripted out. And so if nothing else, if you just sat down with yourself and a piece of paper, even if you're a totally digital person, I encourage you to just grab a pen and paper, sit down and start at the top, right? So what are those critical functions of the business? Write them down. And then right below that, take the first one and say, what do I want to have happen when this critical event occurs? And I don't mean critical as in severe, just critical as the way we've defined it. And walk yourself through it. And don't get overcomplicated. It doesn't have to be this incredibly complex scenario. Just simply put, what would my best case scenario be and first response be for each item? And as you start mapping that out, you'd be amazed at how you will hardwire some of that into your own mind. And if you're not a sole proprietor, if you have other people that work with you, start to use that as a brain session with the team. Don't create those ideas in a vacuum. Work through it as a team, and then make sure that you set those standards for everyone. And
play on each other's strengths. You can't be the master of all trades. Everyone has different strengths. With us, Jeff is clearly the tech guy. His background is strongly in technology, and especially in the managed service biz. So it doesn't make sense for certain issues to be tasked out to me when he knows it forwards and backwards. So you play to people's strengths. Even if it's something crappy, it makes more sense for, the person with the most experience to just tackle it head on and be done with it. Get over that obstacle and move on.
Yeah, completely agree. One of the business principles behind that thought process is often referred to as high payoff activities. And the reason they're defined as such is because for me to complete this task there's high payoff involved in it. So, if you tried to challenge yourself and write down the list of things that you do on a weekly basis, maybe it's not daily, you might have to think a little bit larger to get your list out there. But as you start to go through it, if you truly challenged yourself, if you think of it as a delegation process, not a dumping process, but a delegation process of, is this task better suited or better executed, or could be executed by another individual or another piece of software or another tool to deliver the same result, then it clearly ought to be moved and coached and trained and expectations set around how to do that, so that ultimately what you're left with is at least 80% high payoff activities for yourself.
Well, and this is starting to get into some of the things that we offer. We have a business audit is what we call it. And usually it's a phone call, and it's usually an hour plus long, where we get on the phone with a customer, and we like to do this before we really do anything with anyone, and just assess where they're at, but more importantly, what is their vision for their business? Where do they want to go? This is sort of, what this episode is all about, is, taking that end goal and reverse engineering it, even if you are by yourself or a team of two or more. How do you go from where you are now to where you ultimately want to take your business? And oftentimes we find that people are investing time and resources into the wrong thing. So a lot of people tend to spend money on, say, advertising, for example. They want to go heavy and hard in the advertising space to drum up business, only to find out, and you don't ever really want to find out, that you're not ready for it, because it's a rude awakening. You thought you were busy before, and of course this is what you want. These are good problems to have, but oftentimes it's more valuable to invest in, like Jeff said, technology, so that you can support infrastructure to support growth. That's what we like to call it.
Yeah, and especially in today's age where, now granted, I may take some of it for granted because my background for so many years has been in the technology space specifically, but let's face it, there are apps, there are softwares as a service, there are websites, there are tools, there are automation pieces.
And there's just best practice.
And there's, clearly best practice. And then there's principles, right? So back to the blocking and tackling. I think oftentimes, and both Bill and I are guilty of this too, when we've adopted a tool too early because we weren't at the right maturity spot as an operation to effectively leverage the tool and get the desired outcome from it, because we thought it was the unicorn, right? Oh, this is going to solve all these problems, and this is going to fix this. This is going to get customers beating down the doors. And the fact of the matter is, it simply isn't true. If you don't have a clear-cut winning process and fundamentals, blocking and tackling, if you can't block and tackle, they're going to run through you every day, all day.
Well, yeah, consistency is key. That's some of the struggles that we fought early on. I mean, it was bad. We were hemorrhaging cash on some services, monthly fees basically to have some services provide us with CRM and, automated marketing, things like that. And because we had the day jobs, we had a daily grind before we worked on our project business, we weren't consistent. And because of our inconsistencies and ineffectiveness, we wasted a ton of money, time, and resources with very little to show, except for we fell forward.
Right. Yeah, we chased so many of the wrong things, and it wasn't what we were chasing was wrong. The timing wasn't right because we failed to understand with complete clarity what the process and what everything else needed to be. So the tool wasn't the gasoline to make the little fire blow up into a bonfire. It was just a distraction to sink time, money, and energy into. But, to Bill's point about failing forward, which, we'll use that over and over and over again as examples because we admit it to each other, which is big, but, we admit it publicly too. If you're not willing to grow and understand those mistakes, and most importantly, learn when to pull that plug or learn when to admit the failure and move on and pivot, you're just gonna sit there and hemorrhage and bleed out in most cases. But the important thing is to learn from it, right? Don't just fail, give up, and stop. You got to make sure that you're failing forward, and it's all about iteration.
Well, and I mean, some of the thought leaders and mentors that we have followed their advice or not followed their advice and suffered, but basically the gist that I've always taken from some of our conversations with these individuals is if you don't have failures, then you're not trying hard enough. You're not pushing the envelope. You're basically drifting with the flow, and failures aren't a bad thing. It exposes weaknesses that you might not have known were there in your strategy or your game, and then you fix it. And once you fix it, you come back to the table with a stronger platform to leverage.
Yeah, I think one thing I guess I would ask you to do to get off of the preaching and back to the question, I'll try to pose this as a question. So take out that same piece of paper and write down 2 poles on either side of the paper, a scale of 1 to 10, and put risk averse or just plain risk in the middle of it, and rate yourself when it comes to personal risk. I'm not talking about financially. I'm not talking about anything else. Just being able to make a decision, understand that there's implications for it, and be willing to commit to it and try, take action, period. Get off the X. Where do you stack up on that spectrum of 1 to 10? And don't feel like there's a wrong answer. You just need to be honest enough with yourself to know where you land on that spectrum so that you can act and not react when it comes to making a decision. Do I need this software application to replace these couple of processes in my business? Well, it's going to cost X, Y, Z, and I don't know how I'm going to cover that. Okay. So rather than hiding into the money and using the finances as the excuse, it might actually be the personal risk component that you're unwilling to truly face potential failure and make the choice and take the leap and take the jump. But I guarantee you will learn far more, far faster, and go far further by trying. And even if you fail, be okay with it. Give yourself permission to fail. Don't set yourself up for failure, but give yourself permission to fail. And start taking steps, period. Just action regardless.
Well, let's just get into some basic questions that maybe, a lot of our customers and clients that we have consulted for maybe never asked themselves. And this will we'll just spitball some questions maybe for you to ask yourself, and let's build on this together. One thing is, are you successful? Is your business successful? And that's a tough question to come up with an answer. I mean, success is based off of many things. So how are you measuring it? How are you gauging it, and why?
Yeah, the first thing is, success is an extremely subjective word, and the only person that can answer that is you. And the only person that can really answer it is you, because you have to define what success is, right? It might not be a monetary amount or a particular revenue number. It might be a certain head count. It might be offering 12 classes that are half capacity throughout the year, or it might be, I want 30% of the lanes to be available, 60% of the time. I'm not going to set those for you. You just have to know what measurements and what metrics are actually necessary to meet your definition of success. Maybe it is a certain amount in the bank account. Maybe it is a certain number that you're bringing home every month. And all of those things are okay. You just need to know what it is, period. You need to write it down. It needs to be shared. It needs to be known, first of all, and then measured. And then as you're measuring it, you need to challenge it and make sure that it's not necessarily being padded or influenced, or that because you're so laser focused on this one thing, you took your eye off of this other area of the business that was equally as important, but you just failed to measure it too. So, what is your definition of success is the question. You need to come up with that before anyone can help you move towards it, period. Because until you know what success is to you, you can't ever assess the moment-to-moment, second-to-second decisions, because you won't know if you're moving toward or away from that success.
I would go with my next questions to ask yourself would be, it's twofold. What would you say you do the best in your business practices or in your skill set, whatever, however you want to gauge it? What would you say you do the best? And then the counterpoint to that, what would you say that you are the weakest at? It's important to know both ends of the spectrums, to know your flaws, to know your weaknesses, so that you can shore it up.
Following up with that definition of success and what you're measuring, how are you measuring it? And then how do you know, what are the thresholds or the milestones that are telling you if you truly are working towards or away from that success? What are those milestones you set out in front of you? Bill, you talked a little bit about the vision, and do you have one, and is it clear? And there's another exercise that I've facilitated a number of times, and it's actually from the Keller and Williams Realty, the multi-billion-dollar realty, privately owned realty company in the nation. You've probably seen the signs in your yard wherever you live. And he built his business around what he calls the one thing. So the one thing posed in the question form would be, if you could only accomplish one thing in the next 12 months, and that is the measure of success, what is your one thing? Period. And maybe 12 months is too hard for you to start with, so you could reverse it backwards. If you had to only accomplish, not if you only had to, if you could only accomplish one thing in your business in the next month, what is that one thing you would accomplish? Period. And work yourself back to that. What do I need to be focusing on today, this moment, right now, to advance towards that one thing? But until you're laser focused on that one thing, then you're going to end up spinning. So I would challenge you, again, on that same piece of paper that I know you've already taken out by now, to ask that question of what is your one thing? Put it in whatever time frame works for you, but period, get to the one thing. And in some cases, a lot of the folks that we're working with, as they've engaged us, even not necessarily prematurely, but they reached out to us because they felt as though we could assist. Maybe the one thing for you would be working with us on our free business audit phone call, where it's simply a tailored and structured, basically business consultation with you on where you're at, where you're trying to go, what you want, and challenging you to step through some really fundamental questions that, if you haven't established those yet, and they aren't hard questions, they're just very specific questions that you have to get real with yourself on and get to the answers.
Well, and the whole point of this episode is to get you to start asking yourself questions. It's really easy, and Jeff and I have done it several times. We still do it. As you progress, you constantly need to evaluate where you're at and where you're going, so you can pivot. So this exercise, it was mainly just to get you to ask yourself questions, and it's kind of hard to do that in a roughly 20-minute podcast. But the real purpose is to just get your wheels turning on. Maybe you've been in this for 10 years, either being an FFL or an instructor, and it's always good to ask yourself these questions of, okay, I've made it to this point, great success, but where do I go next? How do I push the envelope? How do I take that next step? Where it's always an uphill. You never stop. So with that's how we usually approach the business audit that Jeff is talking about. Is we want to know, because everyone's needs are different. We have customers who they simply want to do this part-time. They want to be, either a part-time home-based FFL, or they want to be a part-time, fill their weekends doing, what they like to do. They like to teach. They like firearms, and, they want to spread the knowledge. And they're not necessarily looking to become, the next giant enterprise out there, or, necessarily make it their full-time gig. They're just happy doing it, and that's fine. So what we look to do for them is to make it efficient, make the management side of things more efficient for them, and try to tailor it towards their idea of what their happy place is in their business, I guess. That's the whole purpose. There is no one way to do this. Everyone's needs are different. We have customers who this is it. This is their full-time gig. They operate a dealership. They sell a lot of guns, and maybe they have an indoor range also at their dealership, and they just want to grow their business intelligently. Because it's very easy to have a runaway train and drop the ball. And frankly, with those customers in particularly, the internet can be harsh. Everyone's a critic out there. And, to avoid some of the black eyes that are that hit some of these dealers out there, all they would have had to do is adjust their game and focus more on the customer, and probably invest in some CRM software or something like that to better manage their customer service. And it doesn't take a whole team of individuals to successfully juggle your customers and keep them engaged, keep them happy, and keep them moving along through your conveyor.
Yeah, completely agree. I think the one thing that was coming to my mind as you were finishing that thought is essentially just being intentional about it, right? So don't let it get complacent. You just have to be intentional about what you're trying to do and how you're trying to accomplish it. And the other thing I thought of as you were talking was even in those part-time customers that we work with, the best part about working with them when we do or as we're working them towards that is they've already figured out that vision in some of those cases, right? They already know the what, at least. I only want to do this on the weekends, and here's how, help me get from here to there, or, help me systematize it and those kinds of things. So,
well, and those are usually the most rewarding to me, because it doesn't take a whole lot on our end to get them to their zen, to get them to where they want to be, to where they have achieved, in their mind, this is it for me. We're smooth sailing from here. Right.
And there's nothing more rewarding on either side than watching that and being a part of that both ways. So with that, I think we've challenged you with some questions. We maybe preached a little more than we thought we would, but in a free flow podcast forum where we're not having a direct conversation with you, it's a little tough to just fire specific questions from the hip. So
I would encourage anyone who's interested to reach out to us via email or on social media, wherever, and let's set up a conversation. It's free. There's no snake oil or anything like that involved. It's just a general assessment of how you're operating, and let's see if we can't make some tweaks to your game to just make it easier on you. We've got some really successful individuals out there who are just killing it as far as either filling seats in their classes or moving some serious product, and it just took a few tweaks to increase their efficiency and their effectiveness, and that's a big win on their end. They're happy. and that makes us happy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the only other point I would make on that is, when we say free business audit or free call, it's not to get you on the phone and just hard sell you, close you. It's literally to build relationships. We practice what we preach. It's the things that have worked for us. It's why we're out here preaching it to you anyway. So for us, it's about understanding who you are, what you're about, where you want to go, and whether or not that's a good fit for whether or not we can help you, because we'll also be the first to say we really can't. Now here's what we can help you with, maybe over here, or here's an individual or a resource that we'll put you in touch with, but
or save you from some costly mistakes that that
absolutely.
we've made or that we've seen others make, frankly, just because either it was the wrong good or services that they were chasing, or they just simply weren't ready for it yet.
Yeah, agree. I think that's a wrap for this one, guys.
Yeah, thanks a lot for listening, guys, and we'll catch you next time. To find out more, you can find us on Facebook at Flashbang Creative, or you can visit us on our website at flashbangcreative.us.